Watch more programs like this on cable and stream with PCN Select. Subscribe at PCNTV.com. This program has been paid for by the sponsor and does not reflect the views of PCN.
Welcome to another edition of PHRC Speaks, Fair Housing in the 21st Century. I'm your host, Adrian Garcia, Director of the Fair Housing and Commercial Property Division for the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. Now, you've often heard me say that I work with passionate, talented individuals that understand housing, and today's guest is really no exception to that rule. I'm talking about Mayur Patel, who is co-founder of Laughman Patel Developers, or LPD as it's also called, which specializes in the development of medical and healthcare facilities. The company provides real estate development, services like site search and design, development, construction of healthcare projects, and they've done their fair amount of housing as well. Prior to establishing LPD, Mayur served as general counsel to Hersha Hospitality Trust, a publicly traded hospitality real estate investment trust. Mayur serves on the boards of AAA of Central Pennsylvania, Harrisburg University, and Old Dominion National Bank. He also serves as secretary of the Pennsylvania Human Relations Board of Commissioners and is the chair of the Fair Housing Committee of that commission. Mayur graduated from Randolph-Macon College in Ashland, Virginia, with a BA in International Relations and Political Science. And he earned his Juris Doctorate degree from the Villanova University School of Law. So now I just want to welcome Mayur to PHRC Speaks. How are you, Mayur?
I'm doing great, Adrian. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction.
No, I appreciate you being here. And obviously, we work together on this Fair Housing Committee, so I appreciate all of your input and support there as well. So let's get right into it. Tell us a little bit about how you became involved with housing justice as a commissioner. How'd you get to that?
And just to reiterate, Adrian, thanks for having me, and I do appreciate the opportunity to come on and speak to you about these important issues. So in your intro, you mentioned that I'm in the business of real estate right now, but prior to that, I was a solo practitioner of law. I had my own law practice in my early days, and one of the areas of law that I focused on was landlord-tenant law. So I ended up representing a fair amount of tenants and some property owners as well. So I got to see the disputes and the issues that both sides had from a lawyer's perspective. And certainly there were good arguments on both sides depending on the type of the case. And then as my career evolved and I went into real estate, I now got to face these same issues as a property owner while I was showing apartments or talking to tenants, and I'd hear their stories from other places that they had rented or other places they had lived in. And, so ever since the beginning of my career, I've got to see tenant and property owner issues up close with everything I've worked on. And I think I've gotten a good perspective on a lot of these issues. So I've always felt passionate that it's an area I want to work in.
And I wondered, since you did have an opportunity to see that from both sides of the fence, so to speak, what did you find was one of your more common reasons for the conflict between landlord and tenant?
I mean, it's a great question, Adrian. I think, it's certainly broad, as a lot of the issues are ones that people would normally think about, that the environment may not be clean, it may not be safe, things may not work in the residence. But I think the broader question and the answer to your question is, it's all about communication. I think I saw that most of the conflicts, like in our everyday lives, evolved from a lack of communication and knowledge from the tenant side and the property owner side. And I think as our committee tries to, and as I think the Human Relations Commission as a whole tries to, is to understand those issues and speak to those stakeholders and help resolve those communication gaps.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I found in my previous life working in a FIP, or Fair Housing Initiatives program, was that we were getting calls on a monthly basis, and we would see that those calls, when talking about the condition of the property, that was one of the highest volume of calls we would get. And when we further drilled down on those numbers, we found that most of the people that are calling fall within the protected classes of the Fair Housing Act. So, the individuals with disability, the elderly, single parent families headed by female head of household, and individuals resettling in from other countries here into the Commonwealth. And so that's what we found was happening. Is it your experience that a lot of the cases that you saw were also within those protected classes, or was it different?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think the majority of the cases from a tenant perspective are protected class members. And, that's a function of, I always like to believe that everybody, property owners and tenants, are all coming to the table with good intentions. I think it's a factor of those protected classes maybe having less access to the information they need, less support, less help that they need. And certainly that's what one of the functions that we here at the PHRC are there for, to help those people get access to problem solvers and solutions to their problems. So I think you're right. I think that's where most of the problems lie, is within protected classes not being treated fairly or not having the same access to solutions.
And sometimes it is exactly that. It's that access to that. There could be an element of not being treated correctly, which is then discrimination, direct evidence of discrimination, and then some of this could be disparate impact of discrimination. In other words, unfortunately, the way it stacks up, it's people in those protected classes that are living in substandard housing. What do you think?
I think you're exactly right. And again, it comes back to economics, right? It's one of those things where if you have more economic means, you have the ability to challenge, to be more mobile, to have access to people that will solve your problems. So I think we talk about protected classes, but in the end, it's everybody's responsibility. So even
Absolutely.
As property owners, again, I do want to emphasize that mostly all the property owners that I know have good intentions. It's a matter of not knowing exactly what the rules are, the regulations are, and administering them fairly. And I think that's part of our job, is to make sure everybody has the information they need.
How long have you been a commissioner with the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission? I think we were talking about that during our prep. And what brought you to the commission?
So I've been a commissioner for approximately 4 years, and it's one of those things where I always appreciated public service. My first job out of law school was actually with the Pennsylvania State House of Representatives. Even throughout high school, I worked with my local politicians to help provide constituent service. So I always had that desire for public service. I always wanted to work among problem solvers, and certainly Harrisburg was the ideal place out of law school to locate for those things. And then even when I went into the private sector over the last 16, 17 years, I've tried to stay as close as I could to the state legislature as far as providing service. And, 4.5 years ago, the governor reached out and said, we have a vacancy on the HRC. He knew of my passion in the areas of discrimination, certainly education disparity, and in housing. And I was given the opportunity to serve, which I really appreciate, and certainly I am enjoying doing what we do.
Excellent. And so now you are also the chair of the PHRC Fair Housing Committee. As the chair, what would you like to see that committee accomplish? What are your goals?
That's certainly a great but very broad question, right? So I know we've had these discussions before. I'll lay it out the way I thought about it when I came to this position in a logical sequence. My thought is, no matter what we aim to do, no matter what our goals are in the Fair Housing Committee, we can't do our jobs unless we know what the problems are, what the policies are, who's affected, how they're affected. So as I tackle any problem in my my home life, my company, I figured that we should essentially learn what the issues out there are. And I think over the last 30, 60, 90 days, we've been doing that. I think once we become proficient at those items, then we should be very proactive in applying them and helping property owners and tenants be aware of what resources there are, what rules there are. And then the third thing, so that's more of an outreach education part. And then the third thing I think you and I have spoken is, unlike other government committees or agencies, I'd like to actually take a proactive approach and execute a project or projects with joint venture partners or stakeholders. Because I think if we are intimately involved in either the development or helping people develop the types of housing that I feel we need, we'll be able to help them better, and we'll be able to help ourselves understand the situation better. So those are kind of the three different areas. One is to educate ourselves, then help pass on that education, and then proactively execute some type of project that shows we have the ability to execute.
Right. And so now we're getting into the meat and bones, right, of our discussion as we look at that and we talk about the goals of the Fair Housing Committee. You mentioned, getting together or partnering with some stakeholders on a particular project. And so that gets me into the discussion of developers, right? Because I am from the belief, very much like you, that everyone should have the information in order to foster a better understanding and, open communication between developers and municipal officials, between property owners, property managers, and tenants. So everyone should be kind of receiving this education and information at the same time, and not just directed, because unfortunately, as you well know, people hear the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission or enforcement, and they right away believe that our role is basically only to look after someone bringing a complaint. What is your opinion? So
that's right. So, that our role as helping anybody that brings a complaint, I feel is kind of the last mile of what we do. It would be great if we worked backwards and helped the system prior to those complaints coming to us, so that we'd cut down on the complaints. And, I think the genesis of these complaints is essentially, again, a lack of communication, lack of thoughtfulness on some of these projects as far as how they should be developed, where they should be developed, how the developers should get help both on a financial and a education side. And I think we had talked about it before, Adrian, that this is one of those unique businesses where if you are a property owner leasing to residential tenants, or if you are a developer of multifamily or single-family residential real estate, there's no certification, there's no licensing, there's no classes. You essentially are an entrepreneur at heart. You pick up your materials and you start doing it. And one of the reasons I have great respect for the people that do it, and certainly I'm not advocating for more licensing and certification, but I think what we're not doing is we're not doing these people a service to give them the very basic understanding of what that development entails, what the actual leasing process entails, what type of questions you're allowed to ask, what things you're not allowed to ask, right? Things that already exist in the law that we, and I think you and I should take some of that on us, is maybe we're not properly communicating that. So I think that's one of our jobs, one of our obligations is to do that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And point well taken. So is there, when we look at developers and that relationship, and I'll ask you from a developer standpoint, in choosing to, say, develop a multi-family housing unit, what are some of the obstacles that you run into when getting into what are some of the things that will prevent a housing development from taking place? What have you run into or your colleagues run into in the past?
So, on multifamily, certainly one of the number one things you hear about is the NIMBY argument, right? Not in my backyard. So a lot of developers, I know they run into that, and it's certainly a real issue from neighbors' perspectives, from a township's perspective. I don't want to discount the issue, but what I will say is, it all starts with proper zoning. And this is the lawyer / real estate technical guy in me. But when a township or other governmental body, planning commission, zoning commission, board of commissioners, looks at the zoning in their region, there should be a very logical progression to how it's laid out, right? There's certain things, services, amenities that belong where you put them. And there's a logic to where you will set out these types of housing, healthcare facilities, grocery stores, those types of things. So if the base, which is the zoning map and the zoning regulations, is solid, then you have a good foundation to work off. And the areas where multifamily housing has been allocated to make sense, and that's where they should have developments. I think in Pennsylvania, we're a little bit of a victim of our long history where we have archaic rules and regulations that townships are slowly working through, but I think zoning fully hasn't caught up, and that's what creates some of these tensions between developers, township commissioners, and then between residents and property owners.
Right, and we've seen here, well, we've talked about it here on PHRC Speaks, that it's everyone's responsibility to affirmatively further fair housing. I mean, it certainly wasn't the way it was originally intended, but we have learned through trial and error, through the involvement of social services, that there are ways of advancing and furthering fair housing through programmatic means that enable access to housing education, and housing counseling, as well as the developer side. My question is, do you believe that there is enough information out there for the developers and municipal officials about affirmatively furthering fair housing, or just housing equity?
I don't. I definitely don't think there is. And I think that's one of the reasons that I was happy to chair this committee and very excited to work with yourself. Is I think that's where the problem lies, right? We if we work backwards, we kind of know the solution. We should start with the premise that everybody deserves clean, safe, fair access to housing. I don't think anybody would disagree about that among our entire audience here. How do we get there? That's where there's some disagreements. And I think we just haven't communicated what the standards and the rules are. And again, a lot of that is probably our fault for not, packaging it properly to deliver it to the right people who need to use that. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's a hard fix. I think with today's technology, it's pretty easy to do that. I also think with the prevalence of associations and different collaborative groups, these people that we are trying to talk to, primarily the property owners and developers, already have forums where they talk to each other and discuss these issues. I think we need to just, find a place among those discussions to kind of interject the ideas we're talking about.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that if we do a concerted effort of reaching out to local organizations that are working in housing advocacy matters and provide that information, we might be able to make a dent in that. I don't know how much we'll do in the way of changing things, but certainly to provide that information so that people are making informed decisions regarding affirmatively furthering fair housing and making sure that everyone has neighborhoods of opportunity. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're looking for. Is that not right?
I think I'm optimistic about being able to change it because honestly, in the last 60 to 90 days, I feel like we've made a lot of progress. We've learned a lot of things that certainly I didn't know, even though I'm in the business. So I'm pretty optimistic that we can make some changes. And I think you mentioned the exact key word. You said neighborly, right? In the end, that's what we're all neighbors. We all need to get along with each other, be kind to each other. make sure everybody has the opportunity to have a clean, safe place to live. It's a very fundamental thing that we're working on, right? It's not data analytics. It's not computer science. We want to make sure people have a safe place to live. So.
And in your experience, I mean, you coming from both the fair housing chair and as well as a developer seat, you're finding that there are people that are acceptable to reviewing this, amenable to the information that we could provide. Is that correct?
I do. I certainly believe that, because I do believe that most tenants and most landlords and most property owners want to do the right thing. They maybe don't have the proper information to do so. Sometimes it becomes an economic issue, and that's where we have great institutions in the state like the PHFA and other groups that do fill in the gaps when there's gaps of an economic nature. So I'm not even pessimistic on the economic argument that a lot of developers use. I think we can help them bridge that gap. And that's where when I started off by saying it would be nice to jump into the execution phase of some of this, that's what I mean. I certainly don't mean we would do our own development. I mean that we would partner up with PHFA, the governor's office, private sector groups to put together a good coalition that can help tackle some of these projects.
Yeah, I think that what also happens is, we talk about rights, and there is a narrative, right? Especially in light of the last 4 years, and depending on how you look at what Trump did to affirmatively furthering fair housing, to that rule, and now obviously everyone looks forward to seeing what happens under the Biden administration with the affirmatively furthering fair housing and some of the focus on housing. Which is a much needed focus. If there's anything that we've learned through COVID, is how important housing is to all.
Right.
So we understand that there are rights out there. However, it's not the rights that we have a problem with. It's not the rights that people don't know about. Those are guaranteed under the law, right?
That's right.
But it's justice that we're trying to get and get to that equality through some equity programs. So whether that's a housing program that provides funding for developers to do affordable housing, whether it's the different housing voucher programs that exist, I think the information needs to go out there to not only developers but also the counties and the zoning and the planning. So
maybe it's on the upkeep side. I as a developer, put my developer hat on and try to keep it as basic in my mind as I try to, is to develop a property, it takes X dollars. To make money on that, you have to lease these apartments at Y dollars.
Mm-hmm.
If that Y falls below a certain number, you can't make money because your costs are so high. So once that's done, if the upkeep is what's costing you money and you're not able to cover your debt or the obligations you have, maybe that's where it comes in to help some of these affordable housing projects keep up to a standard that we believe that people deserve. Maybe that's where we help some of the property owners out. So I think there's a lot of solutions out there that are low cost solutions that we can provide. We just have to put our heads together and bring some parties that maybe historically haven't worked together.
Right. There's also the low income housing tax credit that many people use to be able to do that. What is your belief as to the strategy of using that not only to affirmatively further fair housing, but providing housing for low income individuals?
Yeah, I certainly don't have the up-to-date statistics on hand, but I do know that there was just a recent round of announcements of some of those grants. And I looked through the recipients, and they're all reputable, very good developers that have done these projects before. So I certainly think that's a project that we need to promote and help administer the best that we can from our role. But no, I think that's exactly, you hit the nail on the head. That's the kind of project that we need, or program we need more of to help these projects.
And then I have another question. It kind of dovetails of what you said previously, but what role can the PHRC play with helping overcome the NIMBY attitude or the not in my backyard thought process that at times works against the developers. Because I've seen examples throughout the Commonwealth where there's a project, but then you have concerned neighbors that will speak out and they will say, well, it's going to be tough on the school district, it's the increased traffic and so on and so forth. And many times we see municipalities kind of vote against the housing projects.
So I think, the very short answer is communication and collaboration. The longer explanation of that is you did sequence out the issue perfectly, right? It's a project is introduced, the neighbors get wind of it, they go to the township commissioners, they oppose it, commissioners vote against it because they want to make their constituents happy, and then we don't have a project that otherwise should have gone forward. So if you look at that chain of events, I think you need to first approach those two stakeholders, the township commissioners and the neighbors, and let them know what you're doing. Tell them how this would be a benefit to the community. Tell them why this makes sense to put where you're putting it. And this goes back to, if you had a properly laid out zoning code, then that would be an easy conversation. It's not sometimes, but it's still a conversation to have. So I think, again, I come back to the very basic premise that everybody does deserve clean, safe, fair housing. If you can sit down with constituents and with commissioners and tell them that's what you're providing and how it will positively affect them, that's the argument you have to make. And at the end, that's the kind of project we should advocate as a win-win project, right? We certainly don't want to affect the school district negatively. We don't want to impact traffic negatively. Like when we do developments of medical office buildings, we have to study all those things. How is the impact on traffic? How is the impact on stormwater? How is the impact on XYZ? It shouldn't be any different with multifamily. How is the impact on neighbors? How is the impact on the township commissioners as far as the job they need to do? So I think a lot of it's just talking through it, collaboration. These aren't problems that we can't solve, Adrian. It's just a matter of sitting down together like this and talking them through.
Well, believe it or not, our time has come to an end, Mayur. Wow. I really appreciate you being here and giving us your insight as a developer, as well as a member of our Board of Commissioners and the chair of the Fair Housing Committee. And we do have some progresses that we've done, but we've got a lot of work ahead of us. And I look forward to doing that work with you. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Adrian. I look forward to doing that work as well. And I think you're doing a great job with the show. I really appreciate you inviting me.
Thank you. Thank you. And now for our audience, they say that it takes a village to raise a child. And I submit to you, our viewing audience, that it takes a village to protect our rights, to promote equity, to preserve equality. That's why it's important for the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission to have a diverse cast of talented, passionate individuals from different walks of life, from different disciplines and educational spectrums, to come together and actually discuss and review things that we have to review in order to ensure justice and equality. And so that is basically what PHRC Speaks is all about. It's about getting that information out there. We use this medium, we use our forums, we use educational forums, we partner up with organizations and municipalities and the lending institutions to ensure that everybody understands, at least broadly, what your rights are. Because as I said before, we know we have rights. It's not a problem. We're guaranteed those rights by many laws. What we have is a lack of justice at times, especially in housing. And so we have to strive there. And for that, very much like Mayur said, we have to work upstream. And so that involves a lot of collaboration and cooperation. So for more information, or if you believe that you've been a victim of discrimination in housing, visit us online at www.phrc.pa.gov or call us at 717-787-9780. That's it for this edition of PHRC Speaks. Until next time, take care, be good, and be fair to each other.
This program has been paid for by the sponsor and does not reflect the views of PCN. To get your program on PCN Fusion and for more information, contact info@pcntv.com.